Another area I talk about is education. Now, education traditionally, through most of history, has been a device largely at its higher levels, of course, only available to males and rich people until pretty recently. The poor and women might get a very small amount of primary education and then it stopped. But higher education and even middling education was for the rich and the white and the upper middle class males. That's all changed, and we have attempts to get universal education more or less for everyone. And we have also started to go through another big change, which was that the education basically was what we see in extreme form in, say, Islamic madrasas or Buddhist monasteries, which is repetitive. It's learning the old truths, what was written in the ancient sutras, what was written in the Quran, what was written in the Bible, repeating it, learning it, turning a human being into a library where these great truths are passed on from generation to generation. It was nothing to do with teaching people to think creatively, to question, to come up with imaginative new solutions. Now, to a certain extent, some educational systems moved away from that. My own in England and Cambridge from early on, there was a great deal, even in medieval universities in the West, which was about argument, questioning, and thinking of new solutions, partly because they were geared to things like law, where you needed to do that in certain forms of law, and they were geared to rhetoric, mathematics, and philosophy. And so there was the idea of education actually teaching you to think in a newish way. But that wasn't the Confucian tradition in China, nor in India, nor elsewhere. It's now spread around the world, and it's very good. On the other hand, it's an education which was devised and implemented over the long centuries for a world which is changing so fast, as I've discussed, and facing new challenges in terms of what you do with your life and your leisure and so on. And so we now have to rethink from the scratch, from the bottom upwards, our educational system. And one or two thoughts that occurred to me in relation to that. One is that education was previously seen as a training for your real life, which was your job the rest of your life. So it was from the age, formal education was from the age of 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 until you left school. For most people 14 or 15 or 16, but some going on to university. The universities were earlier. So your education was usually over by 20, if not well before. And then you lived your work life, 30, 40 years, and then a few years retirement and you died. Now all of that has changed. You're going to live much longer. You're going to live in a world with a huge amount of probably leisure and time to do other things. So our education has to change, deal with that. And two obvious ways in which that has got to change is one, that the education has got to train you not for a life of work down mines or factories or even in a lawyer's office or a hospital, but that's going to be only a part of your life. Most of your life will be outside that. So you have got to be trained in the arts of living. And that means in poetry, painting, music, travel, friendship, all sorts of other things, which will be how you will survive and thrive. So the goals and methods of education will have to change And the second is this grouping of education into a period very early in your life. Because the world is changing so fast, because we have to reskill all the time, because we have to refresh our knowledge and our competence, education will have to be seen as something that goes on right through your life. You dip in and out of it. You have a certain education, say up to the age of 18 or 20, then you do something for 5-10 years, and then you go back into education, appreciate other things, reskill, retrain, do things you'd really like to do for a few years, then you go out again, and so on. And it never ends. You have the University of the Third Age, which is popular around England, and even the University of the Late Third Age, which is what I'm entering in my 80s, where you go on learning. You never stop learning. The idea that you've learnt everything you need to learn or will learn by the age of whatever is nonsense. You go on learning forever. And so you have an open university, as it were, an open school system, which gives you, perhaps one idea is that it gives you credits. It gives you, say, 100 credits of education, and you spend the first 20 or 30 getting your primary, secondary, university education. And then you spend another 10 in your 30s and 40s and so on. And each time you can go in and go out and you learn new things. It also deals with the problems of, part of the problem of leisure, because there's nothing as rewarding and time-consuming as learning new things. And so education becomes a form of leisure and activity as well. So that's yet another area where we can look at